Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Thursday, July 11th, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Washington Commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Abe and Christine are out today with us. We are honored to have our old friend, my old friend, political correspondent, is that right, for NBC News?
We'll take that.
Steve Kornacki, the man at the board, the man with the white button-down shirt, who tells us everything we need to know on any and every election night. Steve, let's just jump into it after almost 2 weeks of the craziest political story since Trump in 2016. The Washington Post and NBC News and Ipsos have a poll out this morning that shows A, 85% of Americans think that Joe Biden is too old. B, 56% of Democrats say he should get out of the race. And C, that the race is tied nationally 46-46, which does not, in the national numbers, does not entirely, is not out of sync. I mean, the polling averages have Trump up by 3 nationally or something like that, but he's not up by 10. And this has it tied. And the Democratic Party is obviously in a total tizzy lather stew over the possible disaster facing it in November. The Biden White House is saying, don't get your panties in a twist, like, man up, everything's going to be fine. And they've just been handed a piece of data on this very dramatic day after Nancy Pelosi seemed to signal that he should rethink staying in, and George Clooney, of all people, doing an op-ed that seems to have lit the world on fire. I don't really know why George Clooney's op-ed lights the world on fire. And yet now the Biden administration gets this big present from the Washington Post, NBC, and Ipsos, right? So
ABC, I want him to be clear.
ABC, I apologize, ABC. So what do you make of the state of play?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we'd had before this, I'd say at this point, 10 polls conducted entirely in the aftermath of the debate. The movement in Trump's direction on net was, about 2.5 points. If you looked at the average, we had it yesterday, our own average, we had it at post-debate polling, we had at 3.4. What you have to consider there is that, these polls do have their own kind of, there's trends within polls. The New York Times poll and the CNN poll, not saying they're accurate or inaccurate, but they've been two of the worst for Biden. And they are both in this post-debate average. So that might be swelling that number a little bit, because otherwise, yeah, you're generally seeing a 1, 2, 3 point race, even a tie. As you see this morning, and I think it speaks to two things, at least in my view. The first is the degree to which all this stuff about Biden was already baked in voters' minds. I mean, that what you're hearing in the press, what you're hearing from Democratic leaders right now is them in many ways starting to talk like voters have been talking for a long time about Biden, starting to notice things in public that voters had noticed about Joe Biden many times before. So it doesn't seem to be. I think that's a big reason why his numbers aren't cratering here. And the other side of it too is, I think this is the Trump ceiling. Now, I don't know exactly what it is, and I know he's run higher in a lot of polling this year by a few points than he fared in the 2016, 2020 elections or in the polling either of those years. But I mean, you see it again in this poll this morning. I was just looking at it. You look at the favorable, unfavorable numbers. I mean, Biden's are terrible. They're 33-57. Trump's 35-56. It's not much better.
They're the same. They're basically the same.
Yeah. And so I what I feel like I've noticed here is, the damage. I think there's a question of whether this damage, to Biden of, say it's 2 points since the debate, isn't something that just reverses, not because of anything Biden does, but because there's just such a profound polarization around Trump. And I know you've talked about it a lot, on this podcast. I've certainly heard you. It's true. Trump is presenting himself very differently than he's presented himself in the past. But after 8 years, I wonder how much of that can really be changed in people's minds.
Well, so I listened to Morning Joe this morning, and they spent 10 or 15 minutes on Trump's appearance in Florida the other night, and I watched it and they watched it, and it's not like we watched two different things. I saw this kind of new, like a more relaxed Trump that seemed to have an edge taken off of him that he has always had. And that was not what at least Jonathan Lemire and Katty Kay and Joe and Mika were experiencing. Now they hate Trump, and so that's where they are. But assuming that they represent a significant body in some fashion of Democratic opinion, Trump's change in tone will mean absolutely nothing to those people. They will not perceive it as a change in tone. The question is whether independents will, or people in the swing states will, and that it will make them feel better about maybe voting for Trump instead of staying home, or not voting for Biden or something like that. But I think there is an explanation for the ceiling in the fact that while you are focusing on Biden, it really is the case that people really, really don't like Trump in the United States. And people on the right need to reckon with that fact, even though you look at the order of battle over the last 2 weeks and you say, no incumbent president, as Harry Enton, our friend, has said, no incumbent president has ever gone into an election at this point in worse numerical shape. And we're talking about, Carter. We're talking about the the first George W. Bush, the two incumbents and Trump. So 3 incumbents who lost their first terms, and Biden's numbers are congruent or worse than theirs. So nonetheless, they weren't running against Trump. So I think the Trump ceiling is an interesting thing to.
The Trump ceiling, the Trump ceiling just emphasizes that the Democratic Party has a Biden problem, right? The problem is Biden. And as Steve rightly points out, the media and Democratic elites are now talking like voters who have been saying for years that Biden is too old to be president, and have expressed issues with his age and his capacity for a long time. If we had another Democratic nominee, it's possible that the Trump ceiling would be so low that other Democratic nominee would start off out of the gate competitive or maybe slightly ahead. So it seems to me, this poll from the Washington Post just reminds us that it's a Biden problem. And it makes the Biden problem even worse with the tie head-to-head number, because now the Biden people will say, well, look, stop panicking.
Yeah.
Go back to Hollywood, George Clooney. What are you talking about? We're tied.
I wanted to say that, V.O. Key, the famous political scientist who wrote a book called The American Electorate, the first sentence of that book, which everybody had to read at one point if you were paying attention to politics, is the American people are not stupid. So let me propose this scenario. The American people have been on to Biden's infirmities for 18 months based on or his age, or whatever you want to call it. They have been saying, 2/3 of them have been saying he's too old to be president. Get somebody else. It is the elites that have been lying to themselves about Biden's viability, and that's what shifted. It was elite opinion watching that debate that said we can't have the rose-colored glasses on anymore. The entire country saw something that we have decided either we chose or we were lying to ourselves or whatever. But that these numbers are not appreciably different on how the electorate feels about Biden and his candidacy from what they've been since, I don't know, February of 2023. Is that right? Or did the shift take place later than that?
In ours, it took place started last fall. That
last fall. Okay.
Trump caught
right.
Biden and hasn't been caught since in ours.
Right. Okay. So at the very least, last fall is almost a year, right? I dated it back earlier. But so it's there. They've been saying it's a 1-point race, even though we think that Biden is too old and may have problems. They've been saying that since the fall of 2023. And the panic seems entirely to be among the commentating academic and political and and sort of working political classes. That's an interesting fact. I don't know that it means anything particularly, except that it helps explain the intensity of the last 2 weeks, which are like nothing that I can remember besides the Access Hollywood tape, number one, and then number two, maybe Abu Ghraib, or maybe that first couple of weeks of Lewinsky in 1998, in my political experience, just like, or maybe the beginning of Iran-Contra. Like, there are these moments when sort of the entire world blows up on one story. We haven't had one of those, really. I mean, COVID obviously was a huge story, but I'm talking about sort of politically. And so, but it's because the chattering class lost its mind, right? The public, Seth, the public has been here, kind of.
And you mentioned the Access Hollywood. That comes right to my mind, because the similarity between these two obviously is the kind of, again, for lack of whatever term you want to use, the elite class in the Republican Party in 2016 and the Democratic Party in 2024 looked at these two situations, and they, by their understanding of politics, what they had just witnessed was absolutely had to be necessarily politically fatal. And what you saw then, obviously, in 2016 in the polling was, and this also reminds me a bit of right now, when something like that would happen, Clinton's numbers would not go up. It was just that
Hillary Clinton's numbers. Right, yeah.
Because it was like a great political science experiment in 16. Our NBC poll, by happenstance, was in the field the day before the Access Hollywood tape, and then the 3 days after. And you could watch the day-by-day results go from 7 to Trump down 12, to Trump down 14, to Trump, extended a day, to Trump down a 10, to Trump down 7 again by the 5th day. And it was Clinton's numbers not going up. It was just Trump's coming down. And I kind of wonder if that's a bit, it's not as dramatic, if that's a bit of what we're seeing now. Because the other tell to me in this new poll, when you talk about a ceiling, is they asked us a very basic question: who do you think won the debate? Now, only 7% said Joe Biden won the debate, but 93% didn't say Donald Trump won the debate. 45% said Trump won the debate. I think that speaks again. They all witnessed it. They all knew Biden lost, but there's that huge chunk there that's never going to give Trump an inch on anything.
This is so interesting and so important for people to be hearing, because if you're on the right and are experiencing what Alan Greenspan called irrational exuberance at a bubble, right, and in what seems to be a bubble economy, this is Trump's bubble moment, and the bubble should be better for him. Now, there were a couple of polls in which he seemed to be scratching at 50, 48, 49, something like that. And then in a couple of the battleground state polls, he has hit 50. He's never, correct me if I'm wrong, he has never hit 50 in a poll, and that it has been 9 years, and he has never hit 50 in a poll. I don't know that a politician like that exists in the history of the world that didn't get a week where people said, you know what, I kind of, he's doing okay. Never. So, and now he's running in this race and he hasn't hit 50 either. And so that would suggest this. Yeah.
And I just don't think we should lose sight of the fact that Trump is not the story
right
here. Biden is the story. You could talk about Trump's ceiling. The problem is Biden's floor. And yeah, these national polls of registered voters have a pretty competitive race in many cases, but the swing state polls are terrible for Biden. The Washington Post poll is not the only poll that's been out there in the days since the debate, the 2 weeks since the debate. There have been many other polls, including private polling of swing states, that show Biden in big trouble. Places like public polling, places like Pennsylvania, even the Morning Consult Bloomberg polls of swing states, which were, Biden took some solace in some of them. Biden was still losing, and he was losing by something like 7 points in Pennsylvania, which is the whole game. So I agree, there's a Trump ceiling, but Trump's ceiling matters less than Biden's floor, which is crumbling underneath him. That's the story.
But Trump's ceiling and Biden's floor are inextricably connected. That's the problem with your I think that's one of the things that Steve said on the upside or the downside for Hillary in 2015, which is that Trump was going through the floor, but it didn't help Hillary on the ceiling. And we don't know what would have happened had Comey not come out, 10 days before the election. But if there are two candidates in the race, and an RFK is not a safe harbor for people who don't want to vote for either, which I suspect he really won't be, particularly if we really have this gargantuan story about Biden versus Trump, then you can't really disconnect them so readily, because in the end, are those people just going to stay home? Are they going to flip and vote for Trump? The ceiling stuff is real because people really don't want, there's a lot of people who really don't want to vote for Trump. I mean, that's, I think, what this, it's only like, oh, okay, the hell with it. Fine. I'm going to vote for Obama. Obama had a 42% approval rating in the summer of 2012. And over the course of time, they're like, yeah, you know what? All right, whatever. He hit 51% approval, and then he got 51% on election day, because in the end they came home. He got 4 million fewer votes than he got in 2008 Obama. But I don't know that can happen to Trump. It's not like people are going to go like, I just can't vote for Biden, I'm going to vote for Trump. That's, I think, what the ceiling is.
Usually approval rating is a pretty good stand-in for for what they'll get in the election itself. And in this case, that would be hilarious because it would be like a 35-33 election. There's in other words, there's something missing here that there's not in
percentages always. Yeah, but percentages always have to add up to 100.
Yeah.
So,
but hey, here's my question.
I have a question for Steve. I guess my question based on what you're saying, Steve. Do you think this scenario? Do you think Biden is in a competitive position today, July 11th? Do you see a path for him to win the presidency in November?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I accept everything you're saying. This is not me coming on saying, "Oh, wow, nothing has changed here," and Biden's in. I thought Biden was probably, just looking at the polls, the underdog, before all of this. But right. My hesitation is just in saying this is, taking him out of it is just what I'm saying on those negatives on Trump are so high and so enduring that it's a wild card to me.
So I guess
here's my question.
But just to follow up, that means that Biden's challenge is to make the race about Trump again,
or enough about Trump.
Right. The race has not been about Trump for 2 weeks.
For 2 weeks.
We've had this period for 2 weeks now where the race is about Biden.
Yeah.
And that has hurt Biden and caused the panic in the Democratic Party, it seems to me.
Well, that goes into what I'm going to ask, because I want to ask about the role of the Democratic Party and the other Democrats, because they're having a fight right now over what to do about all this. And on one side, you have people saying, I mean, Biden campaign folks are getting on Zoom calls and telling people we should just stop talking about it. And that's not really working so far. But the Biden campaign is like, they don't seem to have an answer for that. Now, on the other side, John mentioned Morning Joe. The quote that's going around now from Morning Joe is Joe saying that that Biden's people strongly believe that Barack Obama is the unseen hand in the Clooney op-ed and some of the panic. Now, I don't know, but that's the question. Some Democrats stop talking about it. Some Democrats are saying talk about it every second of every day. Some Democrats are saying we hope he fix plants again. And some Democrats did say that. They said put him out there, and that if he has another one of those moments, he absolutely must leave the race. I mean, he could never do another one like that debate. And then you have some who are saying, are they working behind the scenes to push him out or whatever? What are Democrats what do you do if you're the party around the guy here? And you worry that the talk about it is bad for his election prospects, but only if you fail to push him out. And if you succeed in pushing him out, then great. If you fail to push him out, you may have cost him 3 points in the polls. What is the sort of strategy for the party around a candidate like this?
I think one of the things they're looking for here, and it's in the new poll as well, too, is just like how does this Biden number compare to other, specifically Kamala Harris? So, in this poll, they've got Harris up 3. So it's 49-46 for Harris, and it's 46-46 with Biden. Now, this has been, we went back and looked. I'm surprised, over the course of this year, how little this question has been asked. I think it's just an interesting measurement, even if we weren't in this current situation. But before the debate, I think the question had been asked in a poll 3 times. And I think we've now seen 4 or 5 polls since the debate that have a direct comparison. There was one earlier this week that had Biden outperforming Harris by 3. Today, it's Harris outperforming by 3. CNN had Harris outperforming by 4. So it's not conclusive yet, although looking inside the numbers on this, the one thing that jumps out that may be responsible for that Harris advantage is there's been so much talk about the struggle that Biden's been having with Black voters. And I guess there's 2 ways to look at it, but it is a pretty significant difference. Biden in this poll among Black voters, it leads Trump 69-12. And Harris, the number jumps to 83. Goes from 69 to 83. The Trump number does go from 12 to 14, and 14 would be a very high number historically for a Republican among Black voters. But I just the fact that you switch out the name Biden for Harris, and you get a 14-point jump of people willing now to say they're voting Democratic. I mean, that's one of the things Democrats have been worried about, is Black voters potentially not voting at all, just staying home. And I don't know, this one poll, I think we won't have enough to say this conclusively at all. It seemed interesting to me there if it addresses that problem at all for them.
Let me just take a quick break to talk to you guys about the annual summer event at our friends at Boll & Branch. You can get 20% off site-wide and save on bestsellers like Boll & Branch's signature hem sheets, the ones that feel buttery to the touch, super breathable, so they're perfect for both cooler and warmer weather. They're made with 100% organic cotton using the highest quality threads that are completely traceable. This is Boll & Branch's best sale of the season, so take this chance to upgrade your bed and sleep better for years to come. Those signature sheets, loved by millions of sleepers, 11,000 5-star reviews, and its 30-night worry-free guarantee means you can wash, style, and sleep in their sheets for an entire month. If you don't love them for any reason, you can send them right back with free returns on all U.S. orders. And it's not just sheets. Boll & Branch has the airiest blankets, the most cloud-like duvets, the fluffiest pillows, and so much more. So get the best savings event of the season during Boll & Branch's annual summer event. For a limited time, you can get 20% off site-wide, plus free shipping and a free gift with qualifying purchases at bollandbranch.com with promo code commentary. That's BOLLANDBRANCH.com. Promo code commentary for 20% off and a free gift. Exclusions apply. See site for details. Steve, one of the reasons I love having you on is that you know so much about so many different things. And let's talk just quickly about New York and New Jersey. New Jersey being like the source, the wellspring of your political and analytical career. We are hearing, the Politico had a story yesterday, we're hearing that there are these private polls that show the race in New York at a point. If the race in New York is at a point, it is, I think, axiomatic to assume that the race in New Jersey is at a point. If so, if Trump actually has a significant chance in New York and New Jersey, it seems to me that this is game over. I mean, not that he couldn't lose them. And often Republicans are tempted, like Lucy with the football, or have been before Trump, like to make a go at New Jersey nationally and spend 11 or 20 million dollars, something like that. And then the one time they didn't, which was in the 2018 primary, I think it was the Republican candidate for Senate came within 3 points of winning, and they didn't spend any money on it. But is this, in your estimation, is that real? Are there real weird things going on in the states that suggest to you that there's ferment that isn't captured by this Washington Post national number?
Now, so you mentioned New Jersey, my beloved adopted home state. So I'll try to keep this under an hour. But just 3 quick things here. First, just the the first story I ever covered as a reporter in New Jersey politics was in 2002. Control of the U.S. Senate was on the line. National Democrats were, and there was a Senate race in New Jersey where the incumbent Bob Torricelli had narrowly avoided indictment. A prosecutor's memo came out. He fell 13 points behind in the polls. This was a month before Election Day, and the Democrats got him out of the race, got a Supreme Court ruling, flipped in a new candidate, and it was a Torricelli specific problem. They then won the seat. So I've had that in my mind the last couple of weeks as this all unfolds. But the other thing about New Jersey to remember, and I suspect it's going on here, is there was no state, this is a bit dated, but there was no state in the country between the 2000 election, that's when Al Gore and George W. Bush ran, and the 2004 election, Bush's reelection. There was no state that moved in the Republican direction more than New Jersey. And demographically, what it was a post 9/11 effect in blue collar areas of New Jersey, what you'd look at and say the white non-college areas that we talk about. And they gravitated heavily toward Bush in the wake of 9/11. Now, it wasn't enough to make the state truly competitive. It was a 7-point carry margin in the end. But that was a pretty big shift. And I think demographically, that is what we're seeing in New Jersey again right now. The state's changed a little bit. It's more concentrated right now in South Jersey. But I think, again, it's fundamentally, it's a class thing. And there are those blue collar voters who have voted Democratic and continue to vote Democratic, who I think, before all this with Trump, we're making that move back. I suspect it lands New Jersey in the same place it did in 2004. Significant Republican improvement, but not enough to truly make it competitive. In New York, look, New York, I think we have to remember, was already an outlier in 2022. If you looked at the uniform swing in the U.S. House popular vote from 2020 to 2022, and then you looked at the swing from 20 to 22 in New York, it was off the charts in New York toward the Republicans compared to what the national average was. And I think New York's one of those places. We saw this outside of Los Angeles in California, congressional district there, not in the heart of LA, but outside of LA. We saw this outside Portland, Oregon. We see cities where quality of life has really emerged as a major issue, and they are animating the suburbs right outside those cities. And that was why I think in Long Island, you saw some of these big Republican jumps in the House in 2022. You go up to this internal polling where Matt was just referencing a minute ago. You're getting up, Westchester and a little bit north, a little bit west of there, but you're outside New York City. I think the quality of life issues around these cities have resonated so deeply in places like New York. Again, before Biden opened his mouth in that debate, there'd already been movement in New York to bring it. I saw two polls, I think we were talking about them yesterday, two polls that had it in high single digits, even before this. So to me, it's a question that's a bit like 2022, where I agree. Like, look, if it gets down to 1 point, if it ever got down there, that's got to reflect something that's bigger than just New York. But there is room there, I think, for a state like New York, a state like New Jersey to move pretty significantly without the national result really, moving similarly.
It can't be a coincidence, comrade, that the week that these private polls show New York to be closer than expected is the same week that Mayor Adams discovers the trash can and rolled it out as part of New York City's revolution. This bin, John, that you can put trash bags in and leave on the street.
Trash bag singular. Adams rolled out a trash can, and he put one bag.
I think as he finally is being moved to improve the quality of life in New York.
By the way,
one bag, one box.
As Steve, also a New Yorker, can confirm, this policy is lunatic because it doesn't sound like it's lunatic, right? You think, okay, well, he's being a rational person. So I live in just since we're going to go off on this for 75 seconds.
We haven't talked about it yet.
I live in a building that has 65 apartments. The garbage has to be put out twice a week for pickup. Garbage goes to the basement and has to come upstairs from the basement onto the street. My building would need 14 of those garbage cans to get the garbage into the cans before the trucks come to pick them up. What the city is going to look like if this actually is something that every building really does and doesn't just collect the fines is it's going to be lined with garbage cans, like the cities got lined with bollards after 9/11, because you got to put the bags on the street because there's too much of them. It's just that they need to come, maybe do it 3 times a week rather than 2. I'm not going to, then you could maybe have the garbage cans. But you're right that that is something that's going on, that Adams, who is now facing the most interesting political challenge that I never would have expected, which is that Andrew Cuomo is going to run for mayor of New York City. Now, he's got $15 million in the bank that he didn't spend. And he is like going hard on Israel, and he's talking a lot about crime and about immigration. He is running the Anthony Weiner race of 2013, and he may be Weiner again because he's crazy like Weiner and could do crazy stuff. But that is something to watch for our listeners. By the way, the race is next November. The primary in the Democratic Party is September of 2025, and Andrew Cuomo is in it to win it. It would appear, but. Does this one other interesting detail, Steve, that's going on in some of these polls, and I noticed this in a Nate Silver recap of his, projections, is that we are now looking at a possibility of Trump winning the popular vote, which I think would speak to this New York, New Jersey, Oregon, these places that will shift toward Trump, but won't necessarily hand their electoral votes to Trump. But if the margins in these blue states come down to single digits, and Trump runs up huge numbers in the rural states, he could win the popular vote and lose the electoral college. See, we could have just the most hilarious reversal. I mean, right now I think Matt thinks that there's no way he can even lose the electoral college. But I'm just saying that is an interesting factor in the. We've got to get rid of the electoral college because it obviously has this bias toward Republicans because the national vote is so Democratic. Well, maybe not. I don't know.
Yes, I've been thinking about this. Also, I didn't mention, I said the suburbs, but the other big thing about New York, New Jersey too, is diverse populations. And that's what we've seen, where we've seen Trump making inroads in these polls. Latino voters, somewhat Black voters, but so you're talking about big blue states with large non-white populations. And so there's the potential there, to lose California by only 18 points if you're Trump. And that's going to right away, more than 1 million votes off that national popular vote margin are coming off that Biden had. New York, you could shave something similar too, again, without picking up a single electoral vote. And with the big picture irony would be that the kind of prevailing take of Trump's rise in 2016 was that he rallied a coalition of white voters using all sorts of racial, ethnic, appeals, and then exploited this electoral college advantage, and that's how he got elected. And so, yes, it could. It's not, I'd say, entirely likely, but it is absolutely plausible in my mind that the story in 2024 could be that because Trump has made so many inroads with non-white voters above and beyond what we've seen from a Republican before, he now prevails in the popular vote, and it doesn't move the electoral college.
Okay, I've got to ask you a very parochial question about subpopulations and ethnic voting, important to our podcast, which is the Jewish vote, because the last Siena poll of New York, which granted had a very small cohort of absolute number of Jews, I think it was 72 or 75, but showed a number for Trump that no Republican has seen since Reagan, and better than Reagan. That is, it was 52-46. And this was, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, that the Jewish vote would go 52 Biden, 46 Trump. It went 70-30 or 68-29 or something like that for Biden in 2020. There are, I don't know how many exactly there are, 1 million Jewish voters in New York State or something like that. So it's not like a determinative population. Trump would only pick up, another 20% of them. Not, he wouldn't suddenly get 1 million Jewish votes. But if this poll is accurate, and there's no way to know how, I mean, what is the margin of error on a poll of 72 people? 10 points? Something like that. But here's what I thought would be interesting, which is that the Jewish vote is pretty much a national vote. Like, first of all, 40% of Jews live in New York, so that's already 4 out of 10 Jewish voters. But that we can presume that the vote in a state like Pennsylvania would probably track pretty evenly with the Jewish vote in Pennsylvania with the Jewish vote in New York. And Pennsylvania, of course, is supposedly the bellwether state of this election. Biden won by 80,000 votes. If 70% of the Jewish vote in Pennsylvania, which I think was about 240,000, voted for Biden, that was 170,000 Jewish votes for Biden in 2020. If that percentage slipped to 50% in 2024, that would mean that Biden would lose 50,000 Jewish voters and presumably lose them to Trump unless they stayed home. And Pennsylvania was only won by 80,000 votes by Biden. So this is my cockamamie analysis that says that Biden has something to fear from the Jewish vote. And yesterday there's a story by in Jewish Insider about a phone call between to shore up Jewish donors panicked about Biden. And I commend people to go find it at Jewish Insider. I don't want to go into details, but it did not go well. And in fact, we know it didn't go well because the person who was conducting the phone call said, "This is not going well. I think I need to get somebody else more convincing than I to call you guys back to make the case better than I seem to be making it, because you all seem very angry at me and I don't." And so, which I've never seen such an account of
points for honesty.
Really, honest to God, it was just absolutely staggering. So I think the Jewish Democratic panic is real, and the panic is partially because the issue set of Israel has surprisingly turned on Biden, who might, had he not made the moves that he made in the winter, have thought that he might score historic gains in the Jewish vote because of his stalwart support for Israel after October 7th. But is this a cockamamie analysis, or do you think that it's fine if you do think it is? No, the Jewish vote always comes home to Democrats, so this might just be kind of
that's been historically my experience looking at it. I was just calling up while you were outlining the exit polls from 20. Because I know it's checked in a few states, but yeah, Pennsylvania, the sample sizes are too small for them to report a number. So 4% of the electorate 2020 Pennsylvania is Jewish, but that's too small to get a number in the exit poll. So I was just looking to see if we had any statewide numbers from 20. So I've been curious about it, and I'm actually interested to listen to you on it, because we just don't have good polling. Certainly at the statewide level, you can look at states where, again, it could be part of the mix we're talking about, where Trump makes New York a lot closer, picks up popular votes without an electoral college gain. That could happen in New Jersey too. Talk about one of the big shifts in New Jersey has been Ocean County. Lakewood, New Jersey's there. There's this massive growing Orthodox.
That's Seth's home county.
Oh, no
Seth
kidding.
Mandel from Lakewood, New Jersey, right here.
Anyway. In fact, for all the places that I've lived in my life, and all the members of Congress who have represented me, the congressman who represented me at my birth has still the net total years represented me for more than anybody else in my life. Chris Smith, I was born right around the time Chris Smith came in. I think maybe even within a year or something, and he's been there for all, you could figure out how old I am.
Stalwart Republican pro-lifer representing the Jews of
Ocean
Lakewood,
County. Ocean County is
I just want to play with you just to give you a reason to see how, despite the exit polls finding it too small a number. So this is how I came up with my number. There are 300,000 Jewish adults in Pennsylvania, and historically it is said that Jews vote at around 80% of in serious elections. And so I came up with a number of 240,000 Jewish voters. If 70% of them voted for Biden in 2020, that's 170,000 voters. If there's a shift downward from 70 to 50, which is what the Siena poll suggested, that's a net loss of 50,000 voters. So that was it's not paralleled by anything. And it is a demonically difficult thing even to separate out Jewish voters from general Democratic voters, activist Democratic voters anyway. But in a close one, if we're talking again about 50, 60, 70,000 votes in Pennsylvania, just a shift like that with a minor shift in the black vote and a minor shift in the Hispanic vote could turn that one state to Trump. And according to every map that we see, if Biden doesn't win Pennsylvania, particularly if the map is narrowing after the debate, he's cooked. Is there a scenario, by the way, that you can see where Biden can lose Pennsylvania and win? What would he have to win? What do you have to take off the map?
They'll tell you North Carolina. But, and that's, make of that what you will. But, I've always look, North Carolina went from Trump by 150,000 in 2016 to 75,000 in 2020. And it surprised a lot of folks how relatively close they got it there. It wasn't even called by the time the election was called nationally. Now, that said, you look at the position Trump's established, like in Georgia, reestablished in Georgia, and it's kind of hard to believe that if Trump's winning Georgia by a few points, which is what's suggested right now, at least, that North Carolina would flip. But that's the one they talk about flipping that could shake up the electoral map.
The other thing about Pennsylvania is that it's significant because Democrats basically did in Pennsylvania what you would have to do to secure the state. And so if it's in play, that's the other thing, which that you can't do better if you're a Democrat than having Josh Shapiro be the governor of Pennsylvania. He was the sort of one-man blue wall, although the red wave didn't materialize to nearly the extent that people expected. Josh Shapiro was always going to win the governorship and always always up in polls by like double digits, even as Fetterman was unclear he was going to pull away from Oz until, even in the final days. But Fetterman is also this guy who came in and said, I like working class people. I dress like working class people. He's not gone far to the left. He says, I'm not a squadnik. I'm not a progressive. He says, I'm not, so if you're the Democrats, what you did in Pennsylvania seems to me to be almost perfect in terms of who you have there representing you in that state and how they are able to reach those voters who are in the middle. If Pennsylvania is up for grabs or moving away even from Biden, what does that say about the type of voters we're talking about here? Rust Belters and all the rest, who they perfectly lined up people for in Pennsylvania. Elsewhere, they don't have anything like, a one-man blue wall type politician like Josh Shapiro. What is that a sign nationally of a real crisis among that group of voters for Democrats?
Yeah, I mean, look, the ingredients for Pennsylvania in 2020 for Biden were just the counties right outside Philadelphia, obviously just quintessential wealthy, high white college educated population suburbs that were, core Republican suburbs a generation ago and are now core Democratic suburbs. So, Montgomery County, Chester County, places like that. He just drove up numbers, beyond what Democrats had done before. And Trump, meanwhile, did, squeeze more out of kind of the rural areas of the state, but the suburbs kind of drove that. The question for me on a state like Pennsylvania is when you see Trump competitive there, and again, the polling right now can't really, I think, get at this, but Pennsylvania's got a number of mid-sized cities with very significant and fast-growing Latino populations. A place like Hazleton, Pennsylvania comes to mind. It is now, I think, 70% Latino. And if you went back to the turn of the century, the number might have been 10. It's happened that quickly. Reading, Pennsylvania, talking about cities like that. When you see in the polls, the gains Trump has made with Latino voters, and that's where, among non-white voters, that's where the significant gains have been. I just wonder if what's driving the numbers in Pennsylvania we see are places like that, Berks County, Pennsylvania, not so much movement in the suburbs of Philadelphia or even Pittsburgh.
I want you to put on your historian's hat, which is another hat you have, political historian's hat, and talk a little about the open convention fantasy. I think it's a fantasy, but let's say it's not a fantasy. Let's say something like that could really happen. So I was looking back, and the disaster, the ultimate democratic disaster of all time, or convention disaster of all time, took place in 1924 when the convention went to 103 ballots. Pick John Davis, I think was his name, and Coolidge won 380 electoral votes. Robert La Follette, actually, the progressive candidate, got 16% of the vote nationally. But that was the moment at which you could see a party like in total sort of disarray at a convention without any fixed idea of who its candidate should be going in, which would kind of be the case if there were some version of an open convention in 6 weeks that the Democrats held. But I was also then looking back at the moments before the primary system overtook, right? And the thing is that there's a huge amount of sentimentality about the back rooms and how the back rooms always pick a solid choice, really, they would do what they had to do and deal with the people on the floor later. And was that in the 60s, one of the reasons that everybody ended up going to a primary was that the Republicans picked Goldwater in 64, who went down to a historic defeat. And in 68, the backroom picked Hubert Humphrey, and the entire Democratic Party rewrote all of its rules between 68 and 72 to make sure that the cigar smokers back there no longer had the power to do what they had just done. So I'm interested because now it's been so long since there was actually a convention that made any kind of decision that people may be sentimentalizing the wisdom of crowds here in the Democratic Party getting together to pick its nominee in August the way it might once have many decades ago.
It's fun to think about, just if you're into politics and everything. What's being described right now, and it's very loose, obviously, it would be a little different from any of these past scenarios in that they're talking about having, it seems, some kind of mechanism where the candidates are set ahead of time. Maybe that's delegate signatures or something, because the big thing in the really old conventions was the word was stampede, and people that you'd show up and you would not have announced you're a candidate, you wouldn't have a committee, people would think you might have interest, maybe you didn't, and everybody would get their kind of speaking slot in the first couple nights, and who could get the 20-minute standing ovation after their speech. So like a famous example of this, if you merge the old and the new, would be go back to 1984. This is actually 40 years ago, but Mario Cuomo comes to the Democratic convention. The first-term governor of New York delivers this, stem winder of a speech. Now, the rules by 84 were set. It was, pledged delegates all the way. But in the old days, the speech that Cuomo delivered would have set off a stampede. He would have been nominated from the floor. So the convention itself was constantly producing speech by speech new candidates. And that's how you could get these, 100 ballot affairs. I guess what they're talking about here is, there'd be 3, 4, 5, whatever it is. They would hold, they're describing a series of forums around the country. Again, not quite sure how that would work. There'd be a pledge for positive campaigning. I don't know if the delegates would vote by secret ballot or if they would have to declare their preference within their state delegation meeting. That would be a big issue because you still do have people who kind of play, not like as much as the old days, but kind of have some power brokers at the state level. These are their people in a lot of cases who are part of these delegations. But they're describing something that at least in theory has a little bit more order to it, but I don't know how much order you could impose in a situation like
in a month, like something that's never happened before, and you're going to have a nice orderly procession with selected candidates and positive campaigning and some kind of a debate system, and all this is all sort of supposed to appear out of the ether, never having been done, and nor with any model of any other country as an example that we could follow, including who's going to print the ballots or whatever. last question I have then is, so you wrote, a book about the Republican Party's changes, but the Democratic Party has 4,000 delegates coming to the convention. 2,000 of them, I mean, they're all 99% of them are sort of pledged to Biden. But if they were somehow loosed, the question is, who are they, and why would anybody think that they would choose the guy who could win? Even though I know they all want to beat Trump, but suddenly you have an open shot, and you have union members, you have NGOs, you have party activists, and maybe Josh Shapiro would be the best possible candidate under Seth's reading. I find it extremely difficult to believe after the last year that a Sabbath-keeping Jew is getting the Democratic nomination for president. I don't want to spell out the reasons why I think that is the case, but I just think that is the case. And it just seems to me that the delegates on the floor think Biden's too centrist, is my guess, if you were to poll them. So do you imagine that an open convention would produce a tough, hard-bitten guy who's going to go up against Trump in a tough, hard-bitten way for 2 months, or they would unite around Kamala or whatever, knowing what you know about the inner workings of the Democratic Party?
I mean, yeah, the pledge delegates run the gamut, but there are plenty of them who really are still connected to what you'd call the establishment in their state, in their county, the Democratic establishment, where either the governor, if there's a Democratic governor, a county executive, or a Democratic chairman, a state chairman, a county chairman, something like that, gets kind of their people. A lot of these are elected on the ballot, or gets them through that way. So I think there is still a slant towards having kind of establishment friendly type delegates who would, I suspect, kind of take their cues from what they sense to be the consensus of the party, and often that's spelled out very directly. So I actually think there's kind of an advantage to Biden if he's trying to survive, and it comes down to that. The example that sticks out in my head is, there was an effort in the summer of 1980 when Jimmy Carter had won the majority of pledged delegates in the primary, and his political position, which had been artificially propped up after the siege of the U.S. embassy in Iran, had his completely deteriorated, and he was running behind Ronald Reagan. His approval rating was about 35%. And Ted Kennedy had started off really bad in the primaries that year, but by the end was winning one after the other. And so the Kennedy people spent the summer campaigning because the thing that they can do, the device they have, is the delegates are pledged unless the rules of the convention are changed. Well, you can propose on the first day of the convention a new rule that frees up the delegates. And so that was the Kennedy campaign in 1980, spent the summer campaigning for that rule change. It was the first thing they voted on at the convention. And here was the chance. These Carter delegates could vote to free themselves and could vote to essentially toss out Jimmy Carter and go with Ted Kennedy. But the polling didn't have Kennedy doing really any better against Reagan. And the vote of the delegates went exactly the same as the distribution of delegates from the primary. So I know that's a long time ago, but I think a lot of those elements are still around.
Okay. Well, once again, we did not assign a commentary recommends, so I guess I will take the commentary recommends today and make a very heartfelt pitch for a entirely apolitical novel, apolitical and something that deals with my personal obsessions, which is a book by a man named Jack Viertel, a legend of the Broadway theater, producer, dramaturg, inventor of the Encores series at City Center that resulted in the revival of Chicago, the musical that then won the Oscar, and has been running on Broadway in its second iteration now for almost 30 years. And Jack Viertel, who wrote the best book on how to make a musical, has written a novel, and the novel is called Broadway Melody, and it is the story of a musician and an actress who basically have a 50-year relationship that is never quite consummated until they reach their 90s. And it goes through the entire history of sort of American show business and the theater and where people came from to work in the theater and how the Broadway theater works. And it is fascinating and quite touching and moving and surprising. And it is available on your Kindle. So that's Broadway Melody by Jack Viertel, Viertel. It is very high-end summer reading. And I think you would like it, even if you aren't interested in the theater, because it is a kind of complex love story with a triangle and all kinds of stuff going on. But it is particularly juicy if you have. So that is the commentary recommend. Steve Kornacki, amazing to have you. I hope you'll come back intermittently during this season to provide us with more wisdom and insight, because we need it. And for Matt and Seth, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.